who's as adamant about his or her position as I am about mine, whom you think is sharp. Seriously, we know that. And another thing, we heard him say that... Hey Eldorados, Larry Elder here, and welcome to another edition of And Another Thing. This is edition number 18. Again, to become an Eldorado, go to my website, larryelder.com, fill out the form. You'll get a free copy of my award-winning DVD. It's a feature-length documentary on the Second Amendment called Michael and Me, where I confront the esteemed director and ask him 3 times how many Americans use guns to defend themselves each year, and 3 times, well, you'll have to get the documentary to see. Today, let's talk about Jim Carrey's attack on the late, great Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston was an amazing actor, legendary actor, an icon, and for Jim Carrey to dump on him is akin to dumping on John Wayne. What did Carrey say? He did a video on Funny or Die, that video website, where he blasted away at Heston because Heston was the president of the NRA. The song is called Cold Dead Hands, and he essentially says in his lyrics the reason for Heston's embracing of a firearm is because it represents Heston's genitalia. I know. He also tweeted that people like Heston were heartless mother effers, except he didn't say mother effers. Now, let's talk a little bit about what Mr. Carrey has said. Jim Carrey is from Canada. Nothing wrong with that. The Canadians don't have Freddie and Fannie, and they don't have a Community Reinvestment Act, so therefore they didn't have the housing meltdown that we had. I give him mad love for that, as Randy Jackson says on American Idol. But he is from Canada, which means he probably doesn't know a whole lot about American history. He is a high school dropout. My understanding is, from Wikipedia anyway, he dropped out because his family had financial issues. And so that says something about his character, I guess. Heston, on the other hand, went to Northwestern, where he met his wife, Lydia. They were married for 64 years, up until the day Heston died. I think it says something about character in Hollywood when you are a leading man like Heston. I mean a stud, handsome, drop-dead gorgeous, a stud, on location for long periods of time, and yet he remained with his wife for 64 years. On the other hand, Mr. Carrey followed that well-worn Hollywood path. Have a loving woman who stands by you before the money comes in. The money comes in, dump the wife and the child for a new family, and then hypocritically criticize other people for their lack of character. It's a well-worn path that Mr. Carrey has followed, and look, everybody's flawed. I'm divorced. I'm not holding myself up on some sort of pedestal, but I do think that there's something to be said for somebody in an environment with this much temptation like Hollywood to remain with a wife for 64 years. But that isn't even the main thing. Heston was one of those actors who in the 60s stuck his neck out. You know, it may seem quaint now if you're a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old to look at the world now and understand what the big deal is. But understand, there was a time in this country where integration was illegal. In 1963, Heston, on the day of the I Have a Dream speech, assembled in a studio with James Baldwin, the civil rights legendary writer. He wrote a best-selling book called The Fire Next Time, which became an anthem for the civil rights movement. James Baldwin was sitting at that table, along with Harry Belafonte, you know him, Sidney Poitier, Joseph Mankiewicz, the producer and director and writer, and Charlton Heston. They're all sitting there talking about what needs to be done to further this country. And believe me, some of their agents were undoubtedly telling them not to do it. A lot of actors didn't stick their necks out. Remember, this is just a few years after the end of the so-called Hollywood blacklist. The blacklist ended in 1960. A lot of careers were ended. A lot of people were scared to stick their necks out. And much of the country, marrying a white woman if you were black was illegal. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 didn't get passed until the year after this roundtable. And so you're talking about a situation where you saw the movie Mississippi Burning, about the 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi who were killed. The Norman Pattis Bridge, Bloody Selma, that was 1965. That was just 2 years after this roundtable was convened. There was a lot of people who were getting killed in this country, being shot in this country, whose lives and careers were at risk by sticking their necks out in favor of civil rights for blacks. Heston was one of those guys. Now, when Jim Carrey sticks his neck out to attack Heston for gun control, what's his risk? Or what is his perceived risk? Zero. Jim Carrey thinks, like most Hollywood people on the left, that he is simply right, that there isn't any real controversy, just evil people feel differently and evil people don't see his movies. So in Carrey's mind, he's not thinking he's running any kind of downside, any kind of risk. In Heston's mind, he was running a risk. You have parts of the South that will not see a movie with somebody who supports civil rights, and I can't remember when the first on-screen kiss was between a black person and a white person, but it wasn't in 1963. So this is the environment where these men assembled. And you can go online and YouTube and look it up. We're going to put an excerpt of it right here for you on Another Thing, and you'll see.
In a television studio in Washington on August 28, 1963, a small group from Hollywood, California joined to give their own personally held views of the civil rights gathering which took place on that day.
Never once did you give him.
Here, as citizens committed to the cause of civil rights, are
Very sympathetic.
James Baldwin,
And yet I had to do something very difficult, Sidney.
Harry Belafonte,
He's intelligent and articulate, but he's also
Marlon Brando,
turned up. And the problem I
Charlton
faced was
Heston,
human sympathy. But I had to be a relentless
Joseph Mankiewicz,
to get his story and to be sympathetically implacable.
and Sidney Poitier.
Done.
But press him without being mean to him.
The moderator, David Schoenbrunn.
Gentlemen, I think that it's about time to begin our discussion. We're here in the studio today with 7 men who have 2 things in common. They are entertainers and artists, and they've all come to Washington. They're 7 out of some 200,000 American citizens who came to the Capitol to march for freedom and for jobs. They came from many states of the Union and in many states of mind. They came with many different involvements. Some of them who came here to Washington were long-term fighters for civil rights. Some of them have joined only very recently, but perhaps just as intensely. Perhaps we can start with these men and ask each and every one of them to tell us very succinctly, to begin the discussion, what brought them to Washington. And how Mr. Heston was about to come in on this. Earlier you said very modestly and with considerable humility that until recently you'd reserved your civil rights position for cocktail parties. That's no longer true. Would you expand on that first?
I'm afraid I have very little to expand in terms of direct action beyond my participation in the most moving events of today. But I would, to some extent, disagree, at least as I understood Joe's and Marlon's point. The prime thing I extracted from today's events was a quite hopeful and stirring feeling of for the future, and also a restatement of the principles on which this country was founded. Dr. King said most eloquently that now seems finally to be the time when the check which the Negro American has presented so often and had returned to him marked insufficient funds may at last be on the verge of being cashable, and in terms of equality with his fellow Americans. But as an American, I am as stirred by the fact that this is true as I am by whatever capacity I have to empathize with my Negro fellow citizens in their eloquent cry that it finally happened now. And I cannot forget that, as you suggested, this is a country and a system of government that was, however tardy we are in extending freedom to all its citizens, we conceived the idea of freedom for all citizens under the law. And among the many eloquent things that were said today, James Baldwin has written as eloquently as anyone on this subject, but most of the men who have written on civil rights and spoken on it trace back what they speak about to the statements made by Lincoln and Jefferson. And although the end is not yet, as Harry suggested, this is perhaps a beginning. And the times ahead are just as difficult as the times behind, although in a different way.
Where do we go from this beginning? Mr. Heston, you want to say something?
Well, everything that we've been saying in the last few minutes illustrates vividly the vital importance of this question, not only for Negro Americans, but for all Americans, and thus, in view of our position in the world, for all the world. And again, the importance of it and the difficulty, as both Harry and Jimmy Baldwin suggested, that it's not an easy, a downhill coast. the difficulty of the times ahead cannot be overemphasized. Again, I can't help thinking that it was never more eloquently put than Tom Paine put it, writing in The Winter of Valley Forge, in another difficult time for this country, when he said, "These are the times that try men's souls. The sunshine patriot and the summer soldier will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now will earn the love and thanks of man and woman."
See the gravity of the situation, how somber these men were, how critical the time was, and how grave they thought the country was in. The grave condition they thought the country was in. This is the environment in which Heston stuck his neck out, and Jim Carrey is giving him absolutely no love for that. Now let's talk about their respective film careers. On the one hand, you have Jim Carrey. Let's see, he played the character, I forget his name, in Dumb and Dumber. I can't remember whether he was the dumb side or the dumber side, but he played that character. He, of course, played Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. And meanwhile, how many Oscars? Okay. Meanwhile, Heston... Ben-Hur, 11 Academy Awards, tied for the most number of Academy Awards for any film, including Best Actor. Played El Cid. He played Michelangelo. He played Moses every Christmas for the last 40 years, except for 1999. One of the networks has played The Ten Commandments, where he played Moses, and it's usually a ratings winner. So John the Baptist, Moses, Ben-Hur, Michelangelo, El Cid versus Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. You make the call. And finally, Heston was a military vet in World War II. He was in the Navy. Ruben from Pacoima, California. I've been a long-time listener of the show, and I enjoy your approach to the issues. My question is regarding North Korea and the saber rattling they are doing. How credible are the threats, and do you think that this administration will do anything about it? Well, you know, North Korea has been a thorn in the world's side for a very long period of time. The problem is North Korea got nuclear bomb. It's a big difference. I hope you enjoyed this small excerpt. If you want to see the full video, got to be in El Dorado. Go to my website, larryyoder.com, log in, fill out the form. It'll cost you about $4.75 a month, or about the price of a mocha frappuccino latte at your favorite coffee house. As you can tell, I don't like coffee. I'm a tea drinker. See you next time.